Welcome to this short presentation today on conducting a successful rapid review project. This is part of the knowledge synthesis series. There are a few other videos in the series so far that you can enjoy if you want to learn more about scoping reviews. For the moment, that's our other series of videos. But this one today focuses on rapid reviews, and as its term sort of implies, there's this notion of rapidity or speed related to conducting a rapid review. But we will see that there are still steps to take, and although it is a rapid review, there are still methodological guidelines to follow as part of this process. So systematic reviews, or rapid ones, are not just big literature reviews. That's an important statement to make. Lots of these knowledge synthesis review types all have distinct methodologies to follow, as well as rigorous guidelines for publishing results of those reviews. So compared to literature reviews, which tend to be a bit more subjective, maybe a bit more leaning on serendipity as we find research and add it to our review, systematic reviews or rapid reviews or scoping reviews all need to follow rigorous methods to be properly conducted. And so that's just an important piece to remember. Even if it is a rapid review, there are still steps to follow, and we'll talk about those throughout this presentation. Out of curiosity, I did a quick search across 4 different databases to see sort of where we are in terms of how rapid reviews are published across different disciplines. So this graph sort of illustrates a few results from different databases, one in education, one in psychology, one in social sciences generally speaking, and one in medicine/health sciences. And you can see sort of a bit of a trend before the pandemic, and then throughout the pandemic, and then sort of after the pandemic. So rapid reviews, really, if you look at any literature published since 2020, there's this idea in guidance papers where the catalyst for rapid reviews was the COVID-19 pandemic, and this idea of getting research or evidence out quickly to decision makers or to practitioners. And there was this emergence of rapid reviews throughout that period. And what I was surprised to see as well is that the number of rapid reviews published in health sciences or medicine isn't that much higher than in other disciplines. Yes, if we compare it to education and through the general science, social science results that you're seeing on the screen, it is higher, but it's not significantly higher as I would have expected. And so rapid reviews are still an emerging type of review, and guidance is also emerging, as is reporting guidelines as well. And we'll talk about those aspects today in this presentation. But I thought it was interesting to just see sort of that trend over the last several years and notice how rapid reviews are still being used, but not necessarily as much as during the pandemic. So this presentation will focus on defining what rapid reviews are. We'll do a comparison between rapid reviews and more popular types of reviews, I guess, systematic reviews and scoping reviews. We'll identify key characteristics of rapid reviews, and as well, because of the nature of the rapid review, there are some restrictions that are worth noting, and we'll discuss those as well. And finally, we'll talk about best practices for conducting these types of reviews as well as for reporting them. So if we look at 2 definitions of rapid reviews, first one, rapid reviews have emerged as a streamlined approach to synthesizing evidence in a timely manner, typically for the purpose of informing emergent decisions faced by decision makers in healthcare settings. And what stands out in this definition is the idea of a streamlined approach and this idea of a timely manner. And the goal of these types of reviews, if you look through various methods papers, is always around this idea of decision-making or informing decision-making processes. And oftentimes also in a healthcare setting. However, we're seeing rapid reviews being published in other fields as well. So we'll talk about those and provide some examples as well. Another definition that I like is the second one. The rapid reviews are a form of knowledge synthesis in which components of the systematic review process are simplified or omitted to produce information in a timely manner. And again, we're seeing some similarities between both definitions. The first one having that nature of timely manner, the second one as well, and also simplifying the process of some of the steps that are involved in running a complete systematic review. This is a nice table comparing the different types. So if we look at systematic reviews, scoping reviews, and now rapid reviews, the research question in both a systematic and a rapid review context is usually focused and specific, whereas a broader question, a more exploratory question, is what you'll find driving scoping reviews. You'll see a very similar process across the next row where we're talking about the search process. So in every knowledge synthesis review type, it needs to be systematic and transparent. There are ways of making shortcuts in a rapid review, and we'll talk about those too, but nevertheless, it is systematic and it is transparent. The scope and nature of the body of evidence that you will find in systematic, scoping, or rapid reviews is slightly different. One analogy I use often for systematic and scoping reviews is this idea of casting the net broadly to pick up as many results as you can, creating thus a sensitive search when you're doing a search strategy for either a systematic or scoping review. As we'll see today in the rapid review context, the process is going to be a bit streamlined, and therefore the body of evidence will be more selective. So that's something to keep in mind. There might not be as many studies included based on the searches that were conducted. Screening. Screening titles and abstracts, screening full text articles is part of the process across knowledge synthesis projects. It is the same here for systematic and scoping reviews. Guidance really outlines that it should be done by at least 2 people. In a rapid review context, it's recommended if you can, but single person screening is acceptable as a way to streamline the process and get things out more quickly. Risk of bias or critical appraisal happens in systematic reviews, not so much in scoping reviews, but is highly recommended as well for rapid reviews. And that can be a process, again, that can be streamlined a little bit in the context of rapid reviews. And finally, you'll see the last row here is talking about timeline. So 6 to 24 months if you were working on a systematic or scoping review. I've rarely been on a team that has accomplished a systematic or scoping review in 6 months. It's more around the 1-year mark probably, but some reviews actually take more than 24 months as well. So that's just general guideline. And in the context of a rapid review, again, you want to try to get information out quickly to decision makers. So the 1 to 6 month threshold is pretty much the proposed timeline in the context of rapid reviews. If we look at specific key characteristics of this methodology, some of these points are referring back to what I've just mentioned when comparing the different types, but also to the definitions. This idea of providing timely evidence for decision-making process. Also, what will often drive your selection in terms of the methods is this idea of access to time and also to resources. So maybe not having as big a team to work on a full-on scoping or systematic review, you might have a very small number of people who can spend not a lot of time working on this, which might drive your selection to work on a rapid review. Also, you'll see in guidance that there's often this mention of restricted methods. And it's not to say that there are no methods, but the methods tend to have certain restrictions, and we'll talk a bit about those too. Those are basically used to help you accelerate the process of finding the results, screening them, and then interpreting them. Also, another key characteristic, as I've mentioned, is this notion of working individually. So oftentimes this might be appealing to graduate students who would want to do some sort of knowledge synthesis, but might not have the resources or a team set up to help them conduct a full-on scoping or systematic review. Obviously, all these elements lead to the potential for bias at different levels, whether it's through searching because you're just searching a few resources, screening because it's only one person doing it, data extraction as well, and the interpretation of your results too. So there's that potential that happens. And what's important in the context of a rapid review, as is the case for any review, is to acknowledge any restrictions or limitations that you've imposed or any shortcuts that you've taken. So it's very important to do that in the context of any review, but more so in the context of a rapid review. Here are some of those notable restrictions that I was alluding to. When it comes to searching, the idea behind rapid reviews is to not necessarily search 10 different databases. So fewer databases might be selected at the very beginning when you're setting up your protocol for a rapid review. You might decide to use 2, and that's actually the recommended guidance is to use at least 2 databases that are relevant to the research question at hand. So either a subject-specific one and perhaps a multidisciplinary one, or if your field has 2 very specific subject-focused ones, then those could be selected as well. You might also be introducing various limitations in terms of dates, or perhaps also in terms of languages. And although these might not be used in the search per se, they might be used when selecting or screening your results. So again, what's important is to make sure that you report these limitations and that you justify your selection based on resources available or the quantity of data, or if there's an important element that relates to an intervention that you're seeking to validate its efficacy, then you might want to be explaining that as part of your rationale for why you might have chosen a specific date to limit your search. Although it's important to state all of this, there are some ways to restrict this part of the process using these shortcuts. When it comes to screening, I've mentioned this as well, it is possible to use a single reviewer. Guidance accepts that as part of the process of rapid reviews. However, it does suggest, if you can, at all stages, whether it's title and abstract screening, full text screening, or data extraction, to have a second reviewer screen a sample or assess the accuracy of the data that's been extracted from different studies to validate whether or not the single reviewer has basically done a good job. So it's a way of minimizing bias, although that is still very present in the context of a rapid review. The last notable restriction is around synthesizing and reporting. So what happens in the context of a rapid review, it's oftentimes a narrative summary with perhaps limited analysis, again, depending on the resources available, and the fact that there is limited guidance at this point around reporting. And so those are some issues about rapid reviews. What guidance suggests is to create summary tables, which is also seen in other types of reviews that summarize the content from the included studies. And it also recommends, in the meantime, because there is no Prisma extension for rapid reviews, it is under development, it is suggested that you follow and adapt Prisma as a reporting guideline. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term Prisma, it's the preferred reporting of items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. And it's a guidance document more built as a checklist almost of what your final review should include. And it's important to follow these different Prisma guidelines when producing your final report as a way to make sure that you're including all the information that should be there as part of a systematic review if you're using Prisma. And then there are various extensions for different review types. For example, there is the Prisma extension for scoping reviews, and there is one in development for rapid reviews. I thought it helpful maybe to look at the titles of a few published rapid reviews, just in the context of social sciences generally speaking. So I chose a few of them on this slide and the next one. So just to read them off quickly, The Impact of AI on Inclusivity in Higher Education, that is a recently published rapid review. To Ban or Not to Ban, a rapid review on the impact of smartphone bans in schools and its impact on social well-being and academic performance. And even something like Understanding the Perspective of School Children Who Stutter. So you might be wondering, okay, the first two, maybe they're more in line with contemporary issues in higher ed about AI and then also bans of cell phones in schools. What about school children who stutter? It's not necessarily a super pressing issue, and perhaps not one that leads itself necessarily to a rapid review. But again, I appreciate reviewers or authors of these reviews actually adhering to a method, especially if they've done something in a short time span with limited resources, to call it a rapid review. And we can have a discussion around that for sure. Here are a few more titles that I found interesting. So Coping Strategies in Young People During the COVID-19 Pandemic, Mental Health Needs of Soji Refugees in Canada, and News Media Framing of Food Poverty and Insecurity in High-Income Countries. So this is an editorial comment that I will make at this point. I've worked a lot with systematic reviews and scoping reviews over the years, and when I see systematic reviews that search just one database and Google Scholar, I sort of cringe because that's really not the right way to do a systematic review. So oftentimes I feel that people probably could have labeled their systematic reviews as rapid reviews if we consider some of the restrictions that they've done in those published systematic reviews. So maybe that explains also that graph that didn't have huge numbers of rapid reviews published in those different databases. So again, just knowing about these different knowledge synthesis types can help inform and make you better prepared to make the right decision when choosing a review type. There are key methodological papers that have been published around rapid reviews. Dobbins in 2017 published a guidebook with steps for conducting a rapid review. That's a very thorough and detailed document actually that is accessible, but very health sector focused. And so if that is your area, this is a great guidebook to look at. Obviously, some of the steps relate to running rapid reviews in other disciplines for sure, but the focus of that particular guidebook is heavily leaning towards health sciences. Trico et al. In 2017 published a practical guide, which is a very, very detailed guide, I think over 100 pages if I'm not mistaken, published in collaboration with the World Health Organization. So that's one that also has that focus on health, but also very detailed. The one I particularly like is the Garrity one from 2024, recently published. It's an updated recommendations for the Cochrane Rapid Review Methods Guidance for Rapid Reviews. Obviously, the context is related to Cochrane, and if you're not familiar with Cochrane, they publish high-quality systematic reviews in a variety of subject areas, mainly focused on health, however. But their recommended guidance for rapid reviews, they acknowledge that it's in the context of Cochrane, but they're also hopeful that others will use it outside of the Cochrane environment. Therefore, it really lends itself nicely as a guide for conducting rapid reviews. If we quickly break down these two that I like, the Dobbins one and the Garrity one, the Dobbins one basically outlines 5 steps for running a rapid review, from defining your research question to searching for research evidence, critically appraising your information sources, synthesizing that evidence, and then identifying the applicability and transferability for decision making. So that idea again of using rapid reviews to inform the decision making process. I won't go into too many details about this one because it's already a few years old, so I'd rather focus on the Garrity one, which was published recently, that outlines recommendations, 24 of them, around these different themes of topic refinement, searches, study selection, data extraction, risk of bias, synthesis, and the certainty of evidence, and we'll look at some of these aspects in the next few slides. If we start off with topic refinement, the guidance provided in that Garrity article looks at obviously setting the research question, which is going to be the basis of any review project that you lead, whether it's systematic, scoping, or rapid. Obviously, it all stems from the research question. It also highly recommends the involvement of knowledge users, so either decision makers or practitioners that are driving the need for this rapid review to be involved at the point of setting the research question. And so I think that's important to remember, even if you're planning on doing this on your own, to maybe get input from subject matter experts. As is the case with other types of reviews, it's highly recommended to develop a protocol. This is sort of your game plan with outlining the steps you will take to produce your review. There is no specific protocol guidance around rapid reviews, but you can refer to the Prisma extension for protocols, Prisma P, to set that up if you're looking at producing a rapid review. Also, you can define the eligibility criteria at this stage. You can decide to limit to a number of interventions and outcomes in terms of the research questions and what you're hoping to explore as part of the rapid review, but you can also set other criteria related to date, setting, and language, for example. The next big chunk of recommendations in that Garrity paper outline things related to searching. And although I am a librarian, I'm not coming up with this first recommendation, which is to involve a librarian as part of the process. Librarians can bring expertise in terms of developing search strategies, knowing which databases might be more appropriate to search, understanding different ways to automate certain processes, understanding that there are tools out there to help with the screening process. We can provide guidance as well as collaborate through different ways at different levels throughout the process of running a review. Again, whether it's systematic, scoping, or rapid, we bring that expertise to the table And if you're fortunate enough to have a librarian available, then we'll be more than happy to assist with that process. As we've seen already, and Garrity reminds us of the need to at least search 2 databases. They also recommend that the search strategy be peer-reviewed and potentially considering gray literature as well as complementary searching, although that might not always be feasible in terms of time. Study selection is another element of their recommendations. They talk about piloting, which is also important in other types of reviews, but should be done here as well. So piloting abstract and full text screening. Conducting dual screening on some studies to, again, assess the agreement level to make sure that you're trying to minimize bias in the process of screening those titles and abstracts. It is recommended, well, it's not recommended, but it's possible to do single individual screening throughout the process of a rapid review. And they remind reviewers embarking on this type of project to choose important aspects for data extraction. I've been on teams where they extract too much information from all of the studies. Here you want to focus and simplify the process to focus really on those key elements that will help answer your research question. And if possible, as we've already mentioned, verifying extracted data to make sure that the single person is extracting what should be extracted from those studies. There's this element or this discussion also in the guidance around risk of bias assessment. And it's recommended to use validated tools to assess individual studies, and if possible, to do it with at least one other person reviewing that evaluation that takes place. So that's an important part of any review project, making sure that the quality of the studies that are included are of a certain level so that you can base your conclusions on solid evidence. In terms of synthesis, it recommends to provide a descriptive summary, performing a synthesis of the findings that includes a narrative interpretation of the results found, and if possible, again, time allowing, consider the possibility of doing a meta-analysis as part of that process. What I like about this Garrity article is that they're not just coming up with these 24 recommendations out of nowhere. They had published previous guidance in 2020, they've updated it, they've included, as part of the development process of this updated guidance, they've included experts in the field, so they have input from users and of other rapid review researchers. They also include evidence through published reviews that have been labeled as rapid, and they're looking at all of that body of literature, that body of data collected through their interaction with experts to come up with these 24 recommendations. In addition to these recommendations, they also present best practices. And some of these points reiterate comments that were made previously. For instance, using validated tools to assess risk of bias. There are a variety of critical appraisal tools that exist. Making use of them in the context of any review is helpful, and so trying to pick the right ones that have been validated that you can use confidently in assessing the quality of the studies you plan to include. There's also this notice that rapid reviews tend to be iterative, especially in the early stages as you're exploring the literature. You might go back to your protocol and change it, which is not always the case when you're doing a systematic review. Your protocol should pretty much stay the same throughout the process, and if changes need to be made, they're usually reported as well. So here in the early stages of a rapid review, the protocol can be modified. You're also trying to be transparent about the methods used. And this includes outlining restricted methods and discussing limitations so that readers of your rapid review know the steps you've taken as well as the shortcuts that were used to provide timely evidence and timely interpretations of those evidence through your rapid review. And it also is important to consider guidelines around reporting. So the Prisma P, which I've alluded to for protocols, the Garrity paper also talks about Prisma S, which is an extension for Prisma specifically on reporting searches and search strategies and search methods. So that's also recommended in the context of rapid reviews. And until a rapid review extension for Prisma comes out, they refer to Prisma as a means of structuring your final review, obviously adapting where needed according to the realities of running a rapid review. So that gives you an overall sense of some of the guidance provided around conducting and a bit about reporting rapid reviews. So I think the important points to remember in the context of running a rapid review is that you're trying to find a balance between being efficient and timely, but also being rigorous in your approach. So running a rapid review doesn't mean you can do it without following certain steps. Like any other knowledge synthesis project, it's important to adhere to guidance and to report the restrictions that have been chosen, and not only just to report them, but to justify them. So have a rationale behind the restrictions that you've done. And finally, acknowledging that shortcuts can obviously lead to bias as well as other limits throughout the process. Being straightforward or transparent about those through your final review is important. And turning to guidance for conducting and reporting. And I can't stress this enough. I've seen a lot of teams over the years work on reviews that will sort of allude to using guidance. I think it's important to turn to guidance that's there. And as any research you would conducting a rapid review or a systematic review or scoping review should follow certain steps. As you would a lab experiment or qualitative research, you would follow certain methods to run those. The same is applicable in the context of rapid reviews. So this short presentation gives you an overview of what rapid reviews can do, how they can be used, and how you can complete them by following guidance that's been made available.